I don't qualify. Anyway, I have written a book. Kind of surprised to people in parts of our country that I can write, much less read. And but I thank you for your interest. And I will just tell you right up front that this is a love story. It's not an objective analysis of President Bush. This is a story about an extraordinary man who, in my judgment, is the finest one-term president our country has ever had. And anyway, my old pal Andy Card's going to ask some, I'm sure, difficult questions. And I'm thrilled to be here. I'm proud to be here with Fred McClure, too. And Ryan, thank you very much for serving. I see we got some ambassadors here, the Cobbs and Eduardo. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for serving our country as well.
Mr. President, it is a thrill to have you on the campus of Texas A&M and the Bush School, the Bush Library, the Bush Museum. This is all exciting for us because, believe it or not, we've got tremendous pride in you and your dad and your entire family. And this book that you wrote it's more than a love story. It's actually a story written about how to fall in love. Not only with people, but with public service. And the Bush School, which is the greatest legacy that your dad has left for the future, is actually a place where the invitation to be a noble public servant is offered, trained, and performed. And so it's great to have you on the campus of Texas A&M at the Bush School. But why did you write this book when you did?
Well, I wrote it when I did because I wanted Dad to be alive. to be able to see how much not only I care for him, but a lot of people care for him. Secondly, his presidency in many ways was overshadowed by his predecessor, and that's understandable. People are beginning to reassess the presidency of 41, and I want to be a part of that process. And I wanted him to know that the process was going to take place. I mean, he's got a great president. And since the beginning of people understanding that. I wrote it because David McCullough's daughter planted the seed. She told me one time at the ranch, you know, my dad always wished he could have read a book by John Q. Adams about his father, John Adams. I said, I can do that. And so that's why I wrote it. And thank you very much for your interest in it. It's a pretty good read. But we got a big print version for some of you. But
it's funny you should mention John Adams, John Quincy Adams. Your dad was actually born in Massachusetts.
Yeah. On Adams Street.
On Adams Street.
Interesting.
Named for both of the Adamses.
Yeah.
And your grandfather had a tremendous influence on your dad that ended up being an influence on you.
Correct.
So could you tell me what you think the legacy of love gave to your dad that allowed you to get the legacy of love that made it?
Well, it's that public service matters, that we're blessed to be Americans, and that part of that blessing requires us to serve others. And the real lesson. Plus that if you're a lousy golfer, play fast. He was a great golfer. Dad was a good golfer. I'm not a good golfer. At any rate, Prescott Bush, very successful Wall Street guy, ends up being the town moderator in Greenwich, Connecticut. So a lot of his buddies were probably drinking martinis and playing gin at the country club. He's working on behalf of others, and I'm confident that set a profound example for Dad. And his service set an example for his children, of which I was one.
It was funny. I remember when your dad was first running for president in 1979, he held a press conference right around when he announced his candidacy, and he was in Boston. I remember a reporter saying, "Why were you born in Milton, Massachusetts?" And I was impressed with his response. He said, "I wanted to be close to my mother."
Yeah. That's kind of funny because when I was running for governor of Texas, I kept asking Mother, how come I was born in Connecticut?
But in this book, you've written about the phenomenally close relationship that your dad had with his mother.
Yeah. They're very close. And, you know, I tell the story about, so she passed away right after the 92 election, which had to have made the 92 election results even tougher. And Dad and Daro, my sister, go to see Ganny, that's what we called her, and they opened up a Bible. He was actually reading a Bible verse to her and out spilled these letters that he had written to her from the war zone. And they were very close, and she's an angelic person, very competitive, needless to say. It's kind of it runs heavily in our gene pool competition. And, but yeah, she's a sweet, sweet lady. And, you know, I was fortunate to get to know her, and of course, Dad was really fortunate to be raised by her.
Well, and you were fortunate to be raised by as well.
By Mother? Well, you don't know, Andy. I mean, you're stretching it there a little bit. You know, so I used to say in these campaigns, I had my daddy's eyes and my mother's mouth, and you're learning why I said that.
But I was touched early in the book. You describe how your dad wrote a letter to his girlfriend, and he said, I want you to basically be the mother of my children.
Yeah.
And what wonderful children they produced.
Well, I'm glad. No, that's right, Dad. I mean, there's letters that Dad has written scattered throughout the book. He's a great letter writer, and it seems to be a lost art. So maybe one of the things this book will do is remind people of how important writing letters are. But and so scattered throughout the book is a series of letters, some of which he wrote Mom, some of which he wrote to all of us, some of which he wrote me when I was president. And it mattered. Andy was there. It mattered to be able to get, you know, these notes from Dad or phone calls from Dad, because in that he was president, he knew what the pressures of the job were like, and he knew moments can be, you know, very trying, and to have him interject some humor and/or a love note really made a huge difference during my presidency. You know, I recognize there's a lot of psychobabble about our relationship, and that's not exactly our long suit here in this family, but anyway, it's there was but people can't possibly comprehend, and hopefully this book, one reason I've written it is to help people understand better that when you admire somebody as much as all of us admired George H.W. Bush, and he offers help and or comfort, it means more than any advice he can possibly give. I've been asked about my, you know, obviously in the post-presidency, and during the presidency, they said, well, are you calling him for advice? And in the book, I make it clear that, you know, not really. And it shocks people to hear that. And one reason why is that had I said, help, I need your advice, he would have said, send your briefers. This is a man who had made presidential decisions. He knows you don't make presidential decisions off the cuff. I mean, as Andy will testify, we got plenty of opinions off the cuff. What you want to do is listen to people who know what the hell they're talking about, like Ryan Crocker, for example. And when you're president, you've got enormous resources at your disposal to help you make informed decisions. Well, George H.W. Bush knew that better than anybody. And so his great contributions to my presidency was the comfort he provided. And by the way, I had to comfort him at times because our roles got reversed. I was miserable at times when he was president and didn't handle it very well. And Mother used to call me and say, you need to call your dad. And I'd say, I was president at this point. Why? Because he just read some editorial and he's upset. And so I'd call him and say, can you believe what they said about you? And I'd say, Dad, don't worry about it. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. And so our roles got reversed in kind of a unique way. And this book, I think, will bring the life of the presidency from a father and son perspective to you, in a story that only one person can tell.
Well, this book is a biography of your dad,
Yeah.
A little bit of a biography of your mother. It's an autobiography of you, But it is also a unique story about how to carry burdens, how to deal with failure, how to be humble in success. And your parents had a lot of failure. They had a lot of struggle.
Yeah, they did.
And that had an impact on you growing up, losing a sister, being involved in the challenges of moving and different jobs and whatever. Could you talk about some of that aspect in the book that you've...
Well, so here's a guy who runs for senator of Texas twice and loses, and runs for president of the United States in a primary against Ronald Reagan in the state of Texas and loses, and ends up being president. And all the time was still a great father. In other words, defeat didn't define George Bush. There's something greater in life than, chalking up political victories or political losses. It taught me, and I'm confident it taught Jeb, that, you don't need to fear failure. If you fear failure, it'll cause you to make decisions that, probably prevent you from living life to the fullest. And George Bush is a great risk taker. I mean, running for the Senate in '64 was risky. Nobody even heard of the guy. He's coming out of Houston. He's running against Ralph Yarborough. Of course, there's a lot of races you can't win. I mean, it's kind of like golf in a way. If you don't get enough strokes, you can't win the contest on the first tee. He couldn't win that race in retrospect. The Goldwater landslide, and Johnson landslide against Goldwater made it impossible to win, but nevertheless he ran. And then, here's the thing that fascinates me about Dad. A lot of things fascinate me about him, but catch this. So he is all world at Yale. He's Phi Beta Kappa in 2.5 years. That part of the gene pool got diluted. He's the captain of the Yale baseball team that came in second in the nation. He's married with a kid. He's, big time on campus. His father's Wall Street. His grandfather is Wall Street. And everybody says, Wall Street. And he moves to Odessa. I mean, it's an extraordinary person to make that kind of decision. By the way, it's an extraordinary woman to have said, I'm with you. And So as I say in the book, we get out there, and Dad finds us a place to live. And it's a duplex on 7th Street with one of the few indoor bathrooms on the street. A bathroom we shared with 2 ladies of the night. So much for the silver spoon stuff. See, what happens is people develop myths about you in the public life, and I'm sure there's people who have an image of Dad that is not even close to reality. This book will help people understand what he's like, and is it objective? Not at all. No, not even close.
Well, there is a pretty objective part about little toy soldiers. Tell us about the toy soldier.
Well, throughout the book, I try to explain how he disciplined me. And by the way, in contrast with Mother, one time she caught me urinating in the hedges and washed my mouth out with soap. Dad, on the other hand, I'm playing with these little, kind of feeble-looking little toy soldiers, and he said, "Where'd you get those?" And I didn't have a very good answer because I'd stole them. And next thing I know, I'm marching back. He's taking me back. Now, keep in mind, about 6, by the way, not 26. Anyway, so we go back to the store, and I, per his instructions, to walk in and apologize to the manager. It wasn't simply not just putting him back in this little bowl that I'd taken him out of. It was apologizing and, learning responsibility. And that was it. There was no follow-up, no harsh follow-up, no you'll be confined to your room, none of this. It was like, this is what we expect. But his way he disciplined was instructive to me as a future father. But it also meant we stayed very close to him, and we tested their patience, I can assure you. And I can't speak for my brothers and sister, but one of my favorite stories is not in the book, which speaks to Dad's leadership, is the time Mother says to me, your dad and I would like to take you to dinner. I'm 18 years old. You know, didn't really happen that much. And so I'm saying to myself, okay, let's see, dinner with Mother and Dad. Sure, let's go. We get there, and she can barely contain herself. And she says, I discovered an ashtray under your bed. You smoke. And Dad looked at her and said, so do you. And that was the end of the conversation. I mean, very wise. Think about that anecdote for a while. It's you know, and he's a solid guy.
Well, your dad has had a remarkable experience in life where he has, you know, joined the military right out of Andover on his birthday. He goes off to war, and the story of your dad writing letters back to Bar, the story of your dad losing a friend, and it ended up being the first of many letters that he had to send and that you had to send that you never wish you had to send once, never mind thousands of times. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, you're the guy who whispered in my ear, second plane's hit the second tower, America's under attack. I mean, you were there. And you know, we became something. Nobody wants to be a wartime president. Nobody should hope to want to be a wartime president. But I watched this good man become a great commander-in-chief because, first and foremost, he cared deeply about the troops that served underneath him and their families, which is essential if you end up having to be the commander-in-chief. And he wrote letters, and a great letter writer. And one of my favorite stories in the book. So Jenna asked him on his 90th birthday. You might remember that moment when he dives out of a helicopter at age 90. Amazing feat. Says, do you still think about the people with whom you served? He said he thinks about Delaney and White all the time. Those are the two guys on the airplane that died when he got shot down. It's amazing, isn't it? 70-something years later, he still thinks about Delaney and White all the time. What I didn't realize until I'd researched this book is that Dad had invited Delaney and White's sisters to the Oval Office when he became president. In other words, it was still on his mind. He's still thinking about how to help heal the wounds of these sisters that never really got to know their brothers. And that's just one of the most difficult aspects of the presidency is to be the comforter in chief. And I learned at the knee of a master.
Well, here we are on Veterans Day, and we pay respect to all of those who did make sacrifices for us. But I also know that the burdens of the presidency are pretty great. You helped your dad carry the burdens. How did your dad help you carry the burden?
Well, first of all, he served as a great example. In other words, look, you never know what it's like to be president till you get in there. But I had a sense of what it was like, particularly on our family. The biggest burden, by the way, is not a burden to serve something you love. And I love America. That's not a burden. It's just, it may be, you don't sleep as well as you should at times. But it's not a burden. Secondly, if there was a worry, it was about Barbara and Jenna. I put in the book that when Dad decided to run for president, one of the things he never had to worry about Mother being able to handle the job. And Laura gave me the same gift. It's a liberating feeling, just so you know. And for me, Andrew, the burdens were how the experience would affect our girls. And they were not very happy about the fact that I was going to run for president. I mean, it's like, you've ruined our life. You can't win. You are not as cool as you think you are. I heard it all. But, I had seen family grow stronger And I knew that would be the case. And so that burden wasn't a burden. In terms of dealing with the pressures, he helped a lot by just checking in on occasion. But I also know that when you surround yourself with competent, compassionate, decent people, it helps do the job. You're chief of staff of a fine staff. By the way, a very tough job he had, but he handled it with great grace, and people loved Andy in the White House.
That's a good transition to an uncomfortable time.
Yeah.
On September 11th, after I whispered in your ear with those fateful words, a second plane hit the second tower, America is under attack, and you rose to phenomenal responsibility and you led decisively with optimism. I remember being on the plane and you were telling us we were going to go back to Washington, D.C., and I was suggesting that you really didn't want to make that decision at that time. And you were pretty firm.
Hot.
Yes, you were pretty hot.
You made it clear I didn't like your recommendation.
Correct.
However, I took it.
But I remember the phenomenal concern you had for your parents.
Yeah.
And you ended up tracking your parents down, and they were in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I said,
day.
where are you? First of all, the communications, as Andy will attest, were terrible.
Not as bad as he says.
Well, either that or they're denying me certain information, in which case you were terrible. Let me just say that I couldn't, we had trouble making connections with people.
We did.
And I finally found Mother and Dad. Dad got on the phone. It's so comforting. I mean, guy's unbelievably thoughtful person. One of his really great strengths, and one reason he was such a fabulous president, was because he could think about the other person. How does the other person feel? That's why he was able to be so effective about Gorbachev, for example. And so he was very comforting. Mother got on the phone and said, where are you? And she said, Wisconsin. I said, why are you there? She said, you grounded our plane. Man, did I need to laugh at that moment. And I think Andy was in the room when I did that, or in the cabin when I did it. It was awesome, It's like, it was a moment of levity. One of the things Dad taught me is that you got to laugh in life. And I'm convinced that one reason why both Mom and Dad have got such a wonderful sense of humor is because they don't take themselves so seriously. That they're not burdened by, doubt and that they're able to. I don't know if you remember, Mother, you used to have a mat that said, birds soar because they take themselves lightly. And it was I don't remember it, but anyways, I think it was a bathroom mat. Very thoughtful of you, anyway.
Well, I have witnessed or been the brunt of many of the practical jokes that I learned are really a Bush trait. I was surprised to read in your book about a rubber onion.
Yeah. So in Midland, there was a guy who went to Yale. Not a lot of Yale graduates in Midland in 1948. And his name was Earl Craig, very formal kind of guy from Sewickley, Pennsylvania, affectionately known as the Earl of Craig. And he used to love to take his martini and dramatically take the toothpick out and bite the olive in a very grand fashion. So Dad puts the rubber olive in there. He very funny man. And
you inherited the same trait.
I don't know, yeah. He sent jokes into Andy at times. Andy would come in. So in the book, I put this one. Humor really helps. And we had a joyful White House. I mean, we, believe it or not, in spite of the pressures and traumas and stuff, we laughed and enjoyed each other's company a lot. And for those of you running organizations or thinking about running organizations, I'd strongly suggest making sure there's a sense of levity where you work. And so I can't remember what it was, but Andy gets this email from Dad. He comes in and says, "This is from your father." I said, "Okay." He said, a guy gets arrested for stealing a can of peaches. And he and his wife go before the judge. The judge says, "How many peaches in the can?" He says, 6. He says, "Fine, I'll sentence you to 6 months in prison." Before he could leave, the wife raised his hand, and he stole a can of peas.
One thing that you said when you were commander-in-chief that quite frankly surprised me, and that was when you said, and this was during the early talk of the greatest generation, and you didn't want us to talk about the greatest generation as much, and you said we shouldn't use those terms. What was your thinking on that?
I will refresh my memory. I've changed my mind. On Veterans Day in front of World War II vets, of course they were the greatest generation. I don't remember that.
Well, I think you were saying that the greatest generations are also still ahead for this country.
Oh, I got
and
you.
there's servants out there every day.
Got
and
it,
so
yeah.
we celebrated those who were being great every day.
I appreciate that. That's right, yeah.
Well,
68, Andrew. My memory's fading.
well, in your book, you describe some of the traits of decision-making that you learned from your dad,
Right.
and some of the decisions that you learned because of your dad.
Right, right.
And you want to talk about some of the tough decisions that have to be made? And
Yeah, sure. So in order to lead, first and foremost, you have to know where you're going to lead. You can't be befuddled or doubtful. There has to be a certainty in vision, clarity in vision, and a certainty in purpose. And Dad had that. This shall not stand. When he said, "This shall not stand," I remember watching on TV. This is Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. You know, I knew he meant it. And the purpose, of course, was to defend an ally from a ruthless thug. And he defined that in terms of our national interest. And it was a clear position. And he didn't waver. You know, there was a lot of angst and pressure. Curiously enough, when it came time for congressional authorization, which neither of us needed to get, but both of us decided to, and frankly, his decision to do so was instructive to us in the White House. It was a close Senate vote. It was like 52-48 or something like that. I mean, it wasn't an overwhelming sentiment to supporting this shall not stand. But they went and achieved the objective. To show you how things have changed in the post 9/11 world, like Dad, we decided to go to the Congress. Unlike the vote when he was proposing to get Saddam out of Kuwait, our vote was overwhelming to authorize the president to deal with Saddam Hussein. Overwhelming. As a matter of fact, a lot of people now currently in the administration were strong supporters of that referendum. So, and tactically, I learned a lot from Dad. Strategically, I learned a lot from him. I mean, from a strategic perspective, you've got to understand your national interests, define them, and act on them. Tactically, you've got to learn how to achieve objectives. You set the goal, and what tactics are necessary to achieve the goal. And in the book, you'll see that there's a constant comparison between types of decisions we made and lessons I learned in making those decisions.
one of the great experiences that helped to give you better perspective was your involvement in your dad's successful run for the presidency.
Yeah, yeah.
And you hadn't been that engaged in his other campaign for the presidency. You were peripherally involved.
Yeah, I just got shellacked for running for Congress, and it's wasn't quite ready to fire it back up again. Well, second, a two-man race, Andrew. So.
Well, but you played a significant role on the campaign. In the book, you talk about some of the roles you played.
Yeah, well, what happened was that I merged my independent oil exploration company into a larger company. We got some liquidity and was kind of figuring out what to do. Dad had a big meeting at Camp David to introduce us to his campaign staff to be in 1987. So I flew up there. Laura flew up there with me and brothers and sisters. Very thoughtful of George and his brothers and sisters, by the way. So he's got the family there. He's just making sure everybody's included in the process. And so Lee Atwater, the hotshot political consultant's there, and I'd been reading about how Lee had, allegiances maybe elsewhere, and so had Jeb, and so Lee finishes his presentation. Any questions? I said, yeah, how can we trust you? And what Jeb said, Jeb followed up and said, what he's saying is, if there's a grenade, we want you on it first. And in other words, loyalty matters, and purpose matters. And so Lee wisely approached both Jeb and me. He said, if you guys are worried, why don't you come up here? And I mentioned it to Dad, and he thought it was an interesting idea. And so Laura and I and the girls moved up. It's kind of an adventuresome moment. We moved out of Midland, sold our house, bought one in Washington. And so I was in the campaign, no title, but his dad said, you don't need a title. I mean, proximity to power is power. It's the way it is in the White House. It's the way it is in life. And so I was there as kind of a loyalty enforcer, surrogate. I did a lot of things, and it was a great experience to watch him. He ran a great campaign. If anybody ever wonders how to become the nominee of a party, from vice president to president, how to succeed a president, read this book, because he handled the timing superbly during the campaign. President Reagan, first of all, these midterms and all that stuff. Reagan lost, the party lost 8 seats in '86. In fact, people forget it. In the book, I put in there that people get kind of tired of a president after 6 years. I'm an expert on that. and
Not
so,
as tired as you get off as chief of staff.
No, that's right. Andrew, please. And so there was big pressure on Dad to distance himself from Reagan, But he would never do that to a friend. But he also had the wisdom necessary to know that in a campaign you wanted to make sure the person with whom you're affiliated with is as strong as possible going into a general election, not weak. And so it's a classic case of understanding human nature in politics.
Well, when your dad's term as president ended and he moved back to Texas,
Yeah.
That was the beginning of a transition for you as well.
Correct.
And you started to think about what you might be doing. Tell us a little about the conversation of entering the political arena again. I know you ran for Congress, but...
Yeah, that's right. Well, there wasn't much of a conversation because he knew that on a decision like this, whether it be for governor or president, you got to make up your own mind. And there's no question he'd say, I'm for you. I mean, it wasn't one of these things, I had to try to convince him that running for office was the right thing to do. His attitude is, think about it, and once you make up your mind, I'm not going to tell you what you ought to do. Once you make up your mind, I'm with you 100%. On the other hand, I called up Mother when I decided to run against Ann Richards. Said, hey, Mom, I'm going to run against Ann Richards. She said, you're not going to be able to beat her. She's too popular. Go figure. No, Dad leaves office. I don't think I put this in the book. I could not have run for governor had he been reelected. Imagine trying to beat a popular incumbent, and I would have been spending as much time, if not most of the time, defending decisions he made or distancing myself from decisions he made. And it would have been very difficult to get the kind of traction one needs in order to, draw a contrast. And so, in an interesting way, his defeat empowered both Jeb and me to run for office. And
that year was the year that Jeb ran and you ran.
Right.
And the expectations were a little different than some people thought.
I don't know. I don't pay attention either. mean, I thought I could win, and I really did, and I was hoping Jeb would win, but yeah, I mean, people draw conclusions for the wrong reasons. Anyway, in the book's the story about election night. I called Dad and said, I'm getting ready to go declare victory, and he said, congratulations, son. Mom and I are really proud of you. But it was clear his heart was in Florida because Jeb had lost. And one shouldn't be surprised. Once you get to know George Bush by reading this book, it shouldn't surprise you that he cares more for the person who's hurting than for the one who's, winning. And anyway, it's a sweet, sweet moment. It's just all the psychobabblists trying to make a big deal out of that, and obviously it reflects some kind of love for one and not for the other, expectations for one and not for the other. Read the book before you say that again. I mean, then you'll get a better feel for what you're talking about.
Family makes all the difference in the world to the Bush clan, and they are, I'm going to say, the best example of unconditional love. You have experienced the unconditional love of your parents, especially your dad, and tell me how you see that impacting how you love your children. And
well, it's a great example, and but you never know what unconditional love means until your daughters turn to be teenagers. Then you learn. And so in the book I put this: I love you. There's nothing you can do to make me not love you, so stop trying.
That was a great quote.
You're not going to answer this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. What's another great quote in the book? Okay, it's this. It's about George Bush and his faith. Preach the sermon daily, and if necessary, use words. It summarizes the man.
Well, there is a debate taking place now in America that you have been party to, and your mother has been party to. And it relates to a very close relative of both of yours.
George P. Yeah. Mom's got, look, remember, she's the one who said, you're not going to win, she's too popular. So keep that in mind, Andrew, when you're thinking about her wisdom.
Do you want to share any familial insight into what's happening today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of speculation on Jeb. I can tell you that I can speak for 41 when I say this. He ought to run for president and would be a great president should he win. It's on the other hand, like Secretary of State Clinton, he's got as good an insight into what it's like to be president. I mean, these are the two most qualified people in being able to tell you what it's like to be president. And so Jeb is making a very personal decision. And we can pressure him all we want. It's not going to matter. Because he knows the consequences of his decision. First of all, he doesn't fear failure or success. And so he as he said, he's going to make sure it's the right thing for his family. And that should be his priority. And so he's going to make a very informed decision. And so people are always saying, pressure him to run. Well, you can't pressure somebody on such an important decision. I mean, it's not going to cause him to think positive or negatively if we all harass him. Only he can decide. And that's what he's in the process of doing. And, I don't know the timetable, Andy. It's, we'll see. And it would be, awesome if he runs. And if he doesn't, we all love him.
Well, you... And
one time, by the way, I heard him say he doesn't like the idea of a political class. The idea of Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Bush troubles him, which speaks to his great integrity. I said, well, how's this sound? Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Clinton. The point is you don't get to pick the environment in which you run. And so his decision is a very personal decision. He doesn't listen to all that kind of stuff about, anyway.
Well, you and your family have had a long history of nicknames for a lot of people, and your dad's nickname, kind of growing up, was Have-Half.
Half-half, yeah, because he's such a generous person. Mine was all half.
Ellie the Elephant.
I had never heard that.
I'd
till I
never heard
researched
that
the
one
book.
either.
Yeah, that's evidently because he buzzed and his Avenger buzzed a circus and the elephants went wild or something like that, and so his crewmates call him Ellie the Elephant. I mean,
He was the chairman of the party.
yeah. By the way, during Watergate, it's amazing that he came out unscathed. This was a miserable period for baby boomers, by the way, and I was going to Harvard at the time, which is kind of a tough place to go when your dad's the head of the Republican Party during Watergate.
I was on the ballot.
Yeah, you were on the ballot. You won, though.
I won.
Anyway, it's an interesting. So catch this: the guy's UN party chairman, CIA in China. No president has ever had one of those jobs, much less all four.
Well, he also wrote a letter to President Nixon.
He did, yeah.
And it was a courageous letter for a chairman of the Republican Party to write.
Yeah, let's just get out of office.
And
You need to leave. And, he couched it, of course, in much gentler terms. Like your contributions would be recognized and stuff, but the letter was, time for you to go.
And
The next day he went. And the interesting thing about George Bush is that he never, it would have been easy to start thumping your chest during that period and saying, I told him to go. Because, this was a very tumultuous time, and it would have been politically expedient to have claimed credit for, one of the reasons Nixon left office. But he wouldn't do that, of course. That's not in his nature. But ultimately, history sorts things out, and the truth becomes revealed, and this is part of the process of getting people to see the truth of his presidency and his life.
And your dad also frequently was invited by presidents to take on responsibilities.
Correct.
And sometimes those responsibilities ran counter to the expectation. People were suggesting maybe you shouldn't do things like that.
Yeah.
But I was struck in the book how the noble servant gives the invitation that if the president wants you, you should find a way to say yes.
Correct.
And that seemed to be how he lived his life and practiced his service
Well, so
as he took
one
his
anecdote
jobs.
in the book is this. Mother and Dad are riding their bikes in China, Beijing, and a messenger comes up with a top-secret message. And it turns out it was Gerald Ford asking George Bush to come back and run the CIA. And, in other words, re-enter the swamp of D.C. This was an ugly period for the agency. Post-Watergate, a lot of acrimony and very low morale. And, as I understand, you wept. Mom wept when she knew that the person she loved dearly was heading back in. But he wrote, and in the book is the letter that he wrote to Kissinger and Ford and Kissinger, and talked about, if the president asks, I have the responsibility to do.
And that has
And
defined...
I asked, by the way, him and Clinton to run the tsunami relief. And they did, and did well, by the way, and ended up in one of the most unique friendships in our history. The guy who beat George Bush in '92 would tell you that his dad has become like a father figure to him, which speaks volumes for both. Bill Clinton's great respect for George H.W. Bush, and George H.W. Bush's great humility that he wouldn't allow an election to intercede in what is a unique friendship. I think it's remarkable. I really think it's an amazing story.
Has that friendship spilled over to you, so that,
Yeah.
or is there
Well, he calls me Debbie, and I call him
faux
Bubba.
sibling rivalry?
No, yeah, we get along fine. It's we're the only two baby boomer presidents. And, he was born in August of 46. I was born in July of 46. We're both governors of, southwestern states. We both like retail politics. We're both, we both can talk a lot. Now we're both grandfathers. And so we have a lot in common, and we both are members of this very exclusive club, and that is.
And you both love the same man.
And we both love George H.W. Bush. We really do.
And I've been a witness to that. I watched a very memorable trip to the Pope's funeral.
Yeah. That was great. So we set up a delegation. You were on it, Andy, but you weren't on the official delegation, sadly. The official delegation was Laura, me, Dad, Clinton, and Condi. And like you were an alternate. You made the plane, though, of course, since you set the manifest. Anyway, yeah, we got along fine going there, and it was a good experience. Bill's an interesting guy, and it's safe to say I call him friend, and Dad calls him friend too.
Well, the relationship that your dad has had with a fellow who is not only his political adversary but beat him, and the dialogue that they have has become so respectful and loving that it's a great example of what should be happening in America today. Do you think there's any chance that America will get back to the day of civil dialogue?
Yeah, I think so. I think the world's been somewhat polluted by the anonymity on the blogosphere, where people can say anything they want with no sense of responsibility. But yeah, it has to. I mean, at some point in time, we'll see. It's kind of hard to watch, only because you want to make sure decent people in our country say public service is worthy and it's noble, and it's not a sacrifice. And I'm afraid a lot of people look at the harshness in the arena and say, "Why would I want to do that?" or "Why would I want to put my family through that?" And for the good of the country, we got to tone it down.
Well, you're a living example of a legacy that your dad gave to America by allowing you to answer the noble call of public service. And I was impressed in the book how the roots of that, I'm going to say, trait that you love America enough to give it all, started with your grandfather and your grandmother, and the fact that you've never practiced braggadocio.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you have a few times, but your dad hasn't.
I never would have got to be governor of Texas,
Well, it's a great gift, and we are thankful that you told us the story of not only 41, but your dad and your mother and your siblings and your love for this great country, and you give us a chance to have some insight as well to a great family who gave us much more than we are willing to acknowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain in your seats until the President and some other special guests have departed from Farmar, and afterwards, if you haven't purchased your copy of 41, they'll be available in the lobby. Thank you again for being with us today, for your support of our foundation. Thank you as well for those of you who have joined us online. And finally, thank you once again to our veterans who have been in attendance on this very special Veterans Day at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. We'll let you know when you can depart. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.